The Shin Megami Tensei series is no stranger to spin-offs. I mean, you could even argue that Shin Megami Tensei itself is a spin-off of the original Digital Devil story Megami Tensei games that released exclusively on the Famicom in the late 80s. SMT was spinning off before spinning off was even cool. There are the big ones, like Persona, Devil Summoner, Digital Devil Saga, freaking Jack Bros for the Virtual Boy. Then there's Maken X for the Dreamcast, a first-person hack-and-slash that harkens back to the dungeon crawler days of the series' earliest installments. It's got all the trappings of the Shin Megami Tensei series, from its art direction and soundtrack to its focus on player choice and multiple story paths. It also has an incredible English localization.
Why'd you kill Fei Shan? There was no need to kill her. Was it her attitude?
Hey, I said incredible, I didn't say good. This is the kind of stuff I live for. So, let's dive into Shin Megami Tensei's strange spin-off, Maken X. Maken X is a first-person hack-and-slash brain-jacking parasitic artificial intelligence simulator developed by Atlus and released for the Sega Dreamcast on November 25th, 1999 in Japan. North American and European releases followed in 2000. The original idea for Maken X came about while the SMT staff were working on the two Persona 2 games for the PS1, Innocent Sin and Eternal Punishment. Series producer Koji Cozy Okada, main artist Kazuma Kaneko, and first-time director Katsura Hashino headed the Maken X team, who were comprised mostly of Persona 2 staff. Having developed mostly RPGs up until this point, the team was feeling a little burnt out on the genre and wanted to try something new. After seeing Sega's plans and specifications for the Dreamcast, they decided to go ahead with Maken X, developing it exclusively for Sega's new console. In an interview with Dreamcast magazine, Okada and Kaneko described Maken X's development as turbulent. They had originally planned for a simple game, since this was one of the first times the team was creating something other than an RPG, and their first project for the Dreamcast, which was completely new, unreleased hardware at the time. On top of all of that, it was also their first fully 3D game. I mean, already this sounds like more than just the simple project they were hoping for, but then, as development proceeded, the scope of the game expanded. Several new staff members needed to be added, and things became chaotic. Figuring out the first-person combat and working out the kinks of this in a fully 3D environment took much longer than anticipated. When Maken X was released in late 99, early 2000, it was generally well received by critics, with many praising the combat and multiple story paths, while criticizing the controls and long-winded cutscenes. One of the main complaints among players, especially Japanese ones, was the first-person perspective. This was actually a common complaint at the time from Japanese gamers, not just for Maken X, but many popular FPS releases. I don't know where that comes from in general, but I can say that there are a few areas in Maken X where the stiffness of the controls and some of the effects happening in the backgrounds made me feel sick at times. I'll get into that later. Due to these complaints, Atlus went ahead and created a sort of director's cut version of the game, Maken Shao for PS2, released in 2001 in Japan and 2003 only in Europe. No North American release for this one. Maken Shao features a third-person perspective and expands some of the game's cutscenes to include fully animated versions, where the original only had static images. There are a few other gameplay system changes in this version, which I'll get into when I talk about the combat. Unfortunately, my totally legitimate version of Maken Shao didn't work properly when I tried to capture footage, so a lot of what I discuss will be based on research and what's listed in the version differences section of the Megami Tensei wiki. Before all of that, let's set up the story of Maken X. This is a Megami Tensei spin-off, so it has a lot of ideas and themes running through it that series veterans will be familiar with. In the near future, tensions between China and the United States are escalating, and the European Union is on the verge of collapse. Amidst all of this political turmoil, scientists have discovered that the source of all human emotion is an extra-dimensional force called Psi. Two shadowy organizations are pulling the strings behind all these tensions. The Blade Masters, whose aim is to maintain peace and survival at all costs, and the Sangokai, led by a being named Geist and his cohort of Hake, humans with warped psi that have transformed their bodies. There's also a gray plague going on that's been developed by Geist and the Hake, so that's happening too. All of this is just the backdrop to the main plot, which concerns a research institute in Japan, backed by the Blade Masters. They've developed Maken, an artificial being that's capable of directly accessing the Psi dimension. In the opening cutscene, we're introduced to the research team and their leader, Hiro Sagami. On this particular day, his daughter Kei has come to visit the lab with her childhood friend Ko. Unfortunately for Kei, this is the day that the Hake have decided to attack and kidnap her father. This results in the death of her tutor, Fei Chao-Li, who was supposed to be the one to wield Maken and take on the Hake for the Blade Masters. Oops. So now Kei takes on that role and allows Maken to inhabit her body through brainjacking. This is a central mechanic in the game, as the player technically controls Maken and not Kei, despite her being plastered all over the promotional material. Kei's brainjacking and the player's role as Maken sets up several main conflicts in Maken X. One between Kei and Maken, as Kei is only interested in rescuing her father, and she won't be happy about anything that leads her off of that path. Two, between the Blade Masters and Maken, as any choices you make against them won't sit well with them. And three, between the Hake and Maken. They want to see Geist take over the world, and you can end up joining them depending on your choices. Hell, Maken may even have plans of their own. It's all up to you to decide how the story shakes out. Whatever path you choose, what follows is a globe-trotting adventure to either save, control, or destroy the world. Before we go too far down any of those paths, I want to talk about the presentation in Maken X. Visually, this is pure arcade-style Dreamcast aesthetics. It's a look that instantly screams, at least in this era. Something about those two blue skies. It's like a perfect summer day. And I hate summer in real life, so I'll take a Dreamcast summer any day. On the character design side, Kaneko's distinctive art is lovingly realized in 3D. Despite lacking a lot of detail compared to 3D models on other platforms at the time, the human and monster designs retain a lot of the spirit of the original artwork. As for the environments you'll be exploring and fighting your way through, the outdoor stages were my favorites. Snowy Moscow, brightly lit Lisbon, the Brazilian rainforest. London is a vast level, featuring a large central outdoor plaza, a sewer system that can be opened up, and a tower prison. The indoor stages lack the same panache. There are a few neat ones, like the multi-tiered prison of Istanbul or the Gothic castle of Transylvania, but most of the others boil down to samey corridors or mazes with annoying progression mechanics. I'll break down more of this stuff when I go through my playthroughs. The actual level layouts are pretty basic. They're mostly straight corridors, harkening back to the Shin Megami Tensei series dungeon crawling roots, but in Maken X there are only at most one or two branching paths. Not a whole lot to explore, but a few do hide some secrets, which are important to find and unlock to achieve some of the game's multiple endings. The music in Maken X was composed by Shoji Meguro, who was brought on board during development of the first Persona game. His rock, jazz, and electronica-inspired style has gone on to define the Shin Megami Tensei series. Several of the tracks in Maken X are absolute showstoppers. Like, I actually stopped playing just to listen to the music from time to time. Highlights include the track in Lisbon. Amsterdam also slaps. London is sweet as well, and switches up halfway through when you unlock the sewers. I'm playing a lot of the others in the background of this video, but check out the soundtrack on YouTube for more. It's right up there with many other SMT soundtracks as some of the best music ever composed for video games. On the other side of the coin, however, is the English voice acting. There are some popular names here, but this is definitely not their best work.
I am Blade Master Devon.
If you're playing the European release of Maken Shao on PS2, you've got the original Japanese voice cast with English subtitles. But there's no such option on the Dreamcast original. Now, I love bad voice acting, and all of the lines are so hammed up it works.
My name is Tyrus. Although I may not look it, I am a Blade Master.
Others are so flat, it's hilarious.
Maken, what's wrong with you? Why don't you understand our ideals?
Beyond the voice acting though, it's the sound mixing itself that makes the story sequences and cutscenes so distracting. Atlus was going for a more immersive experience for Maken X and decided to use stereophonic sound when recording the voice actors. This was initially only planned to be used during the action scenes, but they liked it so much they decided to record the whole game this way, and that was a terrible idea. For those who don't know anything about stereophonic sound, the way it works is characters' voices come through different channels depending on where they are in relation to the camera, and by extension the microphone in the cutscene. A character standing off to the left will come through your left speaker, and vice versa for a character to the right. A character who is farther away is quieter. A character who isn't facing the camera sounds muffled. This style of recording works well for first-person games where the player character can move around while other characters are speaking.
What is this regarding, Khajiit?
And I think that's why Atlus wanted to implement it for Maken X's action sequences initially. The problem is, the cutscenes aren't viewed from your character's perspective. They're shown from static camera angles, and in a lot of them, your character doesn't even appear. Imagine watching a movie or TV show where the character's dialogue is coming from different angles depending on where they're standing in relation to the camera, instead of just being mixed into the overall soundscape. And on top of that, the sound is also changing with the camera angle cuts. Not to mention they didn't do it all that well. For example, when characters are facing away from the camera, instead of sounding quieter or muffled, they just sound like they were recorded inside of a trash can. It's so jarring and awful sounding that it distracted me from actually paying attention to the dialogue and story beats on my first playthrough. Aside from that, there are other weird sound things going on. In fact, you know what? Why don't we just go through the first cutscene? Because it pretty much encapsulates all of the issues with the audio in Maken X. We begin in the Research Institute, where Hiro Sagami, the Institute leader, and 2 lab technicians are discussing giving an official name to Maken, the artificial life form they've developed. Things start out fine, but then...
Random numbers are fine. It's just artificial intelligence.
It still has life like we do. There's really no difference.
This lady suddenly sounds like she's on the other end of a tin can with a string. So I've got to choose my name. Yeah, I know, we'll come back to this later.
Not too bad for an artificial brain.
Say it like you mean it.
Damn, girl. Kay and Ko enter. Kay's mentor, Faye, also shows up, and Kay's father explains more about Maken.
Is that thing really alive?
Well, we haven't implanted its psi yet. Its form is there, but its mind is empty.
Uh-huh. I know. Well, that's why we're giving it a mind.
So they're going to transfer the psi of a human into Maken's artificial brain. Faye's mentor has been chosen as that candidate because he has a special gene, known as the D gene, within him that allows for transference. It's always D, isn't it? The end goal being that Maken will develop its own sense of self and be able to think independently of the human psi within it. Great. As they proceed with the awakening experiment, they're interrupted by this dude with bare arms and a tongue that shoots scalpels. What? And I love that he just smacks Ko down and there's no sound effect at all. So Bare Arms proceeds to silently lay the smackdown on Kay's father. When Kay calls out, he shoots tongue scalpels at her, but they're blocked by Faye. So Faye dies, and it appears Kay also has the gene capable of transferring her psi to Maken. It transforms into a sword, and we begin the hunt for Bare Arms. Thank God this opening level is so linear too, otherwise how would we track him? He's so quiet about everything. So anyway, that pretty much covers the sound design. We'll look at many awkward line readings and more terrible mixing as we continue. Since we're up to the first stage though, let's talk about gameplay. Controls are fairly simple, if a bit stiff. The Dreamcast only has one joystick, so the first-person movement isn't as fluid as you may be expecting. Moving forward, back, and turning are all on the control stick. To strafe, you need to hold the R trigger and move left or right. Holding the L trigger allows you to look freely around the environment, but you can't move while looking around. Jump is A. Hold R while jumping to hop in different directions. There are also a few platforming segments throughout the game. Nothing too complex, but it can sometimes be difficult to judge the spacing because you can't look down while moving. This is especially annoying in later stages where you need to make certain jumps to access branching parts of the level. Attack is X. Mashing it will usually perform a combo attack. You can also perform different types of attacks by holding different directions while attacking. Left and right usually perform slashes, up and back are thrusts, but it all depends on what character Maken is currently jacked into. That's right, we won't be controlling Kay throughout the entire playthrough. You'll encounter other characters that Maken can brainjack, and they all have different speed, health, and strength stats, as well as different jump heights and special attacks. The special attacks are called EX attacks and can be performed by holding down the attack button and letting the gauge underneath the life bar at the top of the screen fill up. Releasing the button will unleash the attack. Most characters have a special move, a projectile attack, or even a defensive capability, but a few characters have no specials. At least in Maken X. In Maken X, most of these characters were reworked to also have special attacks. EX attacks are neat, but honestly not necessary most of the time. To explain why, let's get into combat. So when you run across enemies, you can press Y to lock onto them. If an enemy is outside of your field of view, a handy arrow indicator will appear on either side of the screen, which is extremely useful. Locking on also reveals an enemy's health bar. Holding down on the joystick blocks most attacks, though some enemies and bosses have unblockable attacks that will need to be avoided. While locked onto enemies, you can hold forward and jump over them to easily get behind and land critical attacks. You do more damage to most enemies by hitting them from behind. Even though it's an intended mechanic, this jump move totally breaks the game. Many larger enemies and bosses are completely trivialized by baiting an attack, jumping over them, and then wailing on them with normal attacks. Some of them can just be baited into attacks and circle strafed around so they can never hit you. Regular-sized enemies can be knocked out of their attacks and stun-locked to death with normal attacks. The game tries to teach you to block and play sort of defensively, but once you figure out these mechanics, the combat loses any strategy or depth. Just wail on stuff before it can wail on you, or bait attacks and either circle strafe or jump. It works on almost everything. This is why EX attacks aren't really necessary. I forgot to use them most of the time because the cheese tactics work well enough on their own. There are also some annoying enemies, such as a few kamikaze types that just run or fly at you, then explode. As a result of all of this, the combat in Maken X, which is what you'll spend 95% of your time doing, is pretty flat and repetitive. It becomes very boring because enemies and bosses, no matter how cool their designs, all basically act the same. There are enemies that look like they're going to pose some sort of agility challenge, the way they skate and flip around, but then you can just catch them out with a normal attack and stun lock them to death. On the flip side, there are larger, more intimidating foes that are complete pushovers because you can just jump over them and humiliate them from behind. Probably a better way to say that. Maken X actually did away with the jumping over enemies mechanic, because it just didn't really work from a third-person perspective. Its exclusion doesn't fix the problems with the combat, though. I imagine it makes that version of the game even more repetitive, because you don't have something in your arsenal to take back control during certain fights. When you defeat enemies, they drop orbs that, when collected, increase your psi rank in the top right corner of the screen. This dictates what new characters you can brainjack. As the game progresses, more powerful characters have higher ranks, and you won't be able to take control of them without meeting their rank. It maxes out at 8. And I like this mechanic. My only issue with it is the orbs that drop from enemies can be difficult to collect. The hitboxes on them are very precise, and they also bounce around after falling out of enemies, so they can bounce to areas of the level you can't access or are out of bounds. They disappear after a short time too. Luckily, you can replay levels to farm rank if you're looking to brainjack high-level characters and don't quite meet the requirement, but the orbs should have a larger hitbox or some kind of absorption radius. As it stands, you have to be standing exactly on them to collect them, and it's just another thing that slows down the pacing of combat and exploration. So, the combat is serviceable, but not great. It's too easy to cheese enemies and bosses, and the ones you can't cheese are frustrating because all they do is turtle up and dictate when you can attack them. And there's one particular part near the end of this game where this becomes a huge issue. There's a segment where you're on a platform that's rising to the top of a missile silo, and these big Tetsujin 28 rejects keep jumping onto the lift. They're heavy, so they keep pushing it down. You need to destroy them quickly. But they can only be hit during one phase, when they open up to launch missiles out of their torso. At first I thought this was just a set piece and only a few would appear, but no, they appear one at a time on a timer after one is defeated. So if you don't do enough damage or you mess up attacking them, they just keep showing up, and the elevator can be pushed all the way back down to the bottom of the silo. So you get stuck in this purgatory of robot attacks. They also don't drop any psi orbs, so there's no benefit to farming them. It's terrible. Despite the combat missteps, Maken X does have an interesting structure. As I hinted at earlier, you make choices that steer the story. Certain cutscenes feature yes or no questions. Depending on your answers, you can open up stages and characters that you otherwise wouldn't have access to. There are also certain parts of levels that can only be accessed by specific characters, which usually lead to other special characters or boss fights. There's a lot of variety and a huge amount of replay value. All of these branching paths and different choices ultimately lead to 7 different endings. The main story paths are dictated by the lawful, neutral, and chaotic alignments that are featured heavily in the Shin Megami Tensei games, but slight variations and twists can arise from certain actions or choices. And Kay will have something to say about what you do as well. Even though she only acts as the first body that Maken possesses, she stays linked to it throughout the game because it's her Sai that awakened it. She'll praise, be thankful, admonish, and come to despise you, depending on your choices. Now, all of that is admittedly really interesting, but the gameplay here is so repetitive that I could not bring myself to play through Maken X 7 times. So here's what I did. I played through the game twice. For my first playthrough, Chill Fucker answered yes to every choice. I also fully explored every stage that I unlocked, which was all of them except for one. There's a stage that's only accessible through one of the ending paths, I think. Maybe there are more ways to get to it, I'm not sure. I also found all of the side characters and defeated the optional bosses. Then I did another playthrough as Jerkface. Jerkface answered no to every question, and we'll see where both of these paths got me. We start out in the Research Institute in Kanazawa, Japan, a straightforward tutorial stage. One thing I forgot to mention earlier is that there are health pickups that range from small to full heals. You can also find green Psi Orbs that increase your rank gauge more than the normal ones that drop from enemies. Finally, there are these floating X's that increase your attack power for a short time. They're sort of like the quad damage pickups in Quake, and you want to try to use them just as strategically. The Research Institute is over quickly, and at the end we fight Bear Arms, who is actually Hake Andre. Despite our best efforts, Kay's father is kidnapped. The research team have recovered Kay, but she got a little sleepy from her ordeal. Ko is concerned about this, but at that moment, Mr. Lee, the leader of the Blade Masters, calls.
What is it this time?
Shh, that's the boss man, dude. You want to get fired? Anyway, turns out the devil himself was behind Kay's father's kidnapping. Which, I mean, no, he wasn't. It was Geist. But we'll let Mr. Lee continue with his old man rant.
Devil's work? Oh, sure. You've convinced me.
Bro, that attitude is going to get you written up. Maken X also does that thing where it only subtitles part of the dialogue.
Quickly, their plan is already in motion. If we want to have even the slightest chance of success, we must leave now.
You sure you got all that? Kay wakes up and Mr. Lee asks if she's willing to pursue the people who kidnapped her father. This is the first choice of the playthrough, so we'll say yes. We then get introduced to the brainjack mechanic. Maken can take control of Hake Andre. Even though Maken has brainjacked old Bear Arms, Kay's mind is still within Maken's artificial brain, while Kay's body is basically an empty shell. Mr. Lee mentions that Maken has the power to destroy minds in the world of Psi. So all of these characters that we end up brainjacking throughout the game are left as lifeless dolls once Maken takes them over, which adds another layer to what we're doing here. Anyway, Maken accesses Andre's memories to find out where Kay's father has been taken. Mr. Lee says to transfer through Hong Kong on the way to Russia to meet Blade Master Kitty. Yes, that's her name. While in Hong Kong, we could meet up with the recently deceased Fei Chao-Li's sister, Fei Shan-Li, who is also a Blade Master. So Bear Arms takes a flight out of Japan, headed for Hong Kong. And I love this image of him just sitting on the plane. He looks so content that he got a window seat. Before things proceed, we see Kay, or her, Psi anyway, inside Maken's brain, in the Psi dimension. We'll visit this space several times throughout the game to get Kay's thoughts on choices we make.
Oh, that's a nice name.
It sure is.
I haven't introduced myself. I'm Kei Sagami. I'm 16 years old, and I attend Jusei High School.
Oh my god, what happened to the filter on her voice? Guess they just gave up on that. So Kay gives us her self-introduction, acting like she's just transferred schools or something and not had her mind ripped from her own body and put into this artificial brain. Before Kay can continue to bore us with her hobbies and the latest gossip, the plane that Bear Arms is on gets hijacked.
Sir, you have our thanks for flying the deadly skies and, by the way, prepare to die.
Honestly, better customer service than most airlines. This is the first time we get to see the map screen. There are several options here, like saving and loading the game, checking out the status of your current character, as well as a list of other characters that you've brainjacked once you've added a few more to your roster. You can also check out the status of the current character that Maken is inhabiting. And dude, save that for when I close the menu. Last, there's the Brainjack or Start Stage option. Any stage where you've left the body of a character can be returned to from the map screen, and you can then Brainjack back into that character. Stage 2 aboard the seaplane is very straightforward. We're just walking through the plane. We need to dodge some projectiles in these luxuriously wide aisles, but it's not too much of a problem. At the end of the cargo area, Maken can Brainjack one of the crew members. This guy is kind of weak and has no special move, but he can stun enemies temporarily with the thrust attack from his baton. So that's helpful. We need this guy to pilot the escape plane since the larger seaplane crashes. Meanwhile, the research team gossip about Mr. Lee, and I'm impressed by how little of substance can be said over such a lengthy cutscene.
Here's something I bet you don't know. His company isn't legitimate.
What? How come you never told me?
Must have slipped my mind. Besides, I don't care what they do, as long as I get paid.
I hope it's nothing too illegal.
Don't be such a prude, Anne.
Well, why Kay? Not Kay, though. This is horrible. If something happens to the chief, will she be like this forever?
Don't worry about Kay. We'll do something. Just calm down.
Don't make any rash promises, and don't drag me into this.
Why don't we just try and sort this out?
Whatever.
Seriously, they haven't said anything, and this cutscene just keeps going for another 2 minutes. When we finally reunite with Kay and Maken, they're in Hong Kong. Inside one of the buildings, we meet up with Fei Chao's sister, Fei Shan Li. This is optional. We could also just not come this way. When we speak to her, she asks us to head to India to defeat Hake Shaja, an Indian TV star who's using the power of his Sai to control people through television. We can accept or decline her offer. Kay pipes up and says she doesn't want to go to India, but you know what? Shut the fuck up, Kay. Of course we accept, and for doing so, Fei Shan Li allows Maken to Brainjack her. She's a nice upgrade from the pilot, with very quick attack speed. After exiting the stage, Kay admonishes Maken for promising to go to India to defeat Shaja. She claims she has no obligation to the Blade Masters and only cares about rescuing her father. Well, too bad, we're going to India. Although maybe I should have said no, because this stage has a really annoying mechanic where you need to get these slow-moving, shield-wielding enemies to fall on panels to unlock doors to progress. The movement is really wonky, and this part where you need to get them to fall through the floors onto the panels is the worst. I guess it's a good place to farm Psi rank though, because they'll just keep respawning if you defeat them normally. At the end of the stage, in a room called the Pool of Reflection, we confront Hake Shaja. You can exit the stage before fighting Shaja if you want, the choice is yours, but let's go fight him. Bro's got style. He gives us a bit of his backstory and talks about how his son betrayed him. He also remembers his Philosophy 101 class in college and jabbers on about the nature of man. But he also explains why he's following Geist.
At last the world will be perfect, peaceful, and free of emotion. I will do this on behalf of my son and loving wife who I miss dearly. May she rest peacefully in her grave. On which you tread, you imbecile. Watch where you walk.
What a shift in tone. As long as you're rank 3 or higher, you can Brainjack Shaja. And now we can head to Moscow and get back on track with the main story. I love snow levels, and this is our first outdoor stage, so it's a nice change of pace from the first 3 places we've been. Maken and Kay immediately run into Blade Master Kitty. If you defeated Shaja, Kitty will have an extra line here commenting on it.
Oh, Big Bad Maken defeated a Hake. Just one?
Alright, you patronizing bitch. Kitty says she'll show Kay the way to her father, but before we can explore Moscow, we have to listen to this old fart cult leader prattle on. We'll have an opportunity to meet up with him later. The research team also talked about a Dr. Guinness who created one of the world's best stouts. Or who originally worked on the Maken project, but left because of ethical reasons. He'll be important near the end. The group also find out that Kay's Psi will eventually be absorbed by Maken if she stays in the Psi dimension for too long. Ko decides to head to Europe to inform Kay of the whole being absorbed by Maken thing. The 2 lab techs argue about whether or not he should go, but ultimately they say it's okay. I don't know why it's up to them to decide. Back in Moscow, Kay finds her dad, but his soul has been taken by Geist.
Forget about your daddy.
Okay. Blade Master Kitty explains that Geist isn't human and wants to destroy the human race.
Those Hake controlled by Geist. I hate him.
Why don't you tell us how you really feel, Kitty? She tells Kay the only way to save her father is to defeat Geist, so Kay begs Maken to follow the Blade Master's wishes. Kitty says she'll contact us when she figures out where Geist is.
Defeat Geist's followers so we can straighten up this chaotic world. Don't you dare turn your back on the human race.
Okay, geez. So now we can finally head into Moscow. This stage introduces these wonderful big guys who fire rockets and spin around like Sonic the Hedgehog when you get close. At the end, inside a large circus tent, we fight this even bigger guy. He chucks grenades when far away, and in close range uses one of two attacks, a slash with his weapon or a punch move with his giant hand. The slash move can be blocked, the giant hand cannot. Both do a lot of damage if they land. After Moscow, we've got choices. We can either head to London or Istanbul. London can be completed to create another path forward, but there's actually a hidden character imprisoned there, and we need another character to unlock the cell. So Istanbul is our next stop. Istanbul is a prison and has several paths that need to be unlocked by flipping switches. We're also introduced to the mutated rats, who are annoying as hell because if they get too close to you, they're impossible to lock onto. There are also these Iron Maiden style enemies who stay closed when looking at them. But when we look the other way, they open up to reveal spikes and run at us. They seem intimidating at first, but all we need to do is walk right up to them, spin around, and by the time we face them again, we can stun lock them to death with one or two attacks, depending on what character we're using. There's actually a prisoner here too, whom we won't be able to free yet, but finishing the stage opens up Athens, home to another Blade Master, Elise. Athens is a bit tricky to navigate. There are some blind jumps and semi-hidden pathways we need to navigate to actually find the Blade Master here. When we find Blade Master Elise, she relays a message from Kitty that Kay and Maken should head to Lisbon. Elise is concerned with stopping the Grey Plague that's currently gripping the world. She asks if Maken will lend its power to defeat Geist. After agreeing to her request, she'll tell us there's a pathologist named Dahl who is one of Geist's Hake. He created the Grey Plague, but the only person who knows where he is his daughter, Bianca, who's imprisoned in Istanbul. Taking control of Blade Master Elise will allow us to unlock the door to her cell. So, back in Istanbul, up in the isolation ward, we brainjack Bianca. This unlocks Hake Dahl's lab in Transylvania, which is a cool stage. It's very short, and I love the large Gothic castle vibes. We find Hake Dahl in the clock tower. His fight has a bit of a gimmick to it. He's invisible until we break the hands of the clocks in the center of the arena. Afterwards, Kay's not sounding too hot.
Listen.
I wish she could say the name. Here, Kay asks if Maken thinks Geist is doing the right thing. This is the yes playthrough, so I don't know how this is going to affect things, but I say yes, I think Geist is doing the right thing. Turns out it's not that big of a deal. Kay just says even if it is the right thing, she won't forgive him for leaving her dad in a vegetative state. The only place to go now is London, which is probably one of the best stages in the game. It just has a lot of variety to it. There's a bit of the city streets in the beginning, leading into a large courtyard area. Flipping the switch at the top opens a path to the sewers. After emerging from the sewers, we're on the other side of the courtyard that was inaccessible due to the large central fence dividing it. A tower on the outskirts has someone locked up inside, but Dahl Hake can't open the door. So, exit London and Amsterdam unlocks, home to another Blade Master, Devon. Amsterdam is another cool stage with some switches to open up new paths and another sewer area. This time we need to control the water levels to find the way to Club Aeolus, where Devon is hanging out. You can completely miss the path to get to the club if you're not careful. It's unlocked by hitting this switch twice and following the drained waterway. I actually didn't find Devon on my first time through, so I ended up going to Lyon, France to meet up with Blade Master Tyrus. Lyon introduces these butterfly gangsters, which I found very entertaining. They look ridiculous. They fly around in suits, carry Tommy guns, and blast pollen at you. Anyway, Tyrus can be easily missed as well if you don't head the opposite way down the subway tunnel right at the beginning of the stage. He's in a back room down here.
My name is Tyrus. Although I may not look it, I am a Blade Master.
A Blade Master?
Of course, Blade Masters must often hide their identities. So, I have as well. I'm disguised as a writer.
This is the first time we hear that Blade Masters need to have disguises. Somebody better tell Kitty and the others that. Tyrus also reveals that Kay's mom was a Blade Master, so this explains why she had the D gene and was capable of fusing with Maken. He also tells us about a Hake named Don Regalia, a real bad dude. To find out where Don Regalia is, we need Sam Smith, who's being held captive in London. Aha! Tyrus asks if we'll devote ourselves to saving the human race. Yeah, sure thing, buddy. Saying yes allows us to brainjack him, and he's quite powerful. Tyrus says he can open all electronic locks, which isn't really true. He can only open a couple, because after exiting France, I tried to take him to Joan of Arc's palace to open that lock, and he couldn't. Overestimating your abilities a little bit there, Tyrus. After leaving France, we get another scene with Kay, who can't even stand up anymore. She asks us if we think personal happiness is the most important thing. Again, a loaded question, but we'll say yes. Kay lets us off the hook by saying that there's probably no right or wrong answer to those kinds of questions. Back in London, Tyrus frees Sam Smith. Brainjacking him will open up Don Regalia's hideout in Sicily, but he can't open the doors at the beginning of the stage, so head back to London, brainjack Tyrus again, then head back to Sicily. Kind of weird, but Tyrus did make a big deal out of saying that only he could open doors. Don Regalia has a cool design, loving the corsages and drawing mannequins with their little hats sticking out of his jacket pockets. We face off against the Don in his poison chamber. During the fight, it's a matter of trying to stay on this center platform which rises up and down periodically. If you get knocked down, Tyrus can't jump high enough to get back on, so you have to wait. Tyrus's attacks shred Don Regalia, though. Once he's down, brainjack him and leave. Kay is getting weaker and weaker in the Psi dimension. She expresses her desire to gain more power so that she can save her father, and asks if Maken thinks she's wrong for wanting this. When we answer yes, she only resolves to gain more power. Don Regalia is actually the one who can access the rest of Joan of Arc's palace, so we head there next, then unlock the door. You can catch a glimpse of an angel-looking character up above, who turns out to be the cult leader who was broadcasting his message in an earlier cutscene. This is Hake Rei. He mentions that when he saw Joan of Arc burned at the stake, he realized that people aren't capable of judging good and evil, so he concluded that humanity needs Geist's guidance. With the path that we're on now, we have no choice but to fight Rei. I feel like if I was on a different story path though, maybe I could agree with him and be able to brainjack him without the fight. Anyway, he's tough, but Don Regalia can stunlock him and push him back, which helps. It took me a few attempts, but after defeating him, we have the chance to brainjack a powerful character. Unfortunately, he's rank 7, which we're not at yet, so all we can do is leave. Bummer.
I feel so bad for Joan of Arc.
I don't know why, but that line just gets me. It's so absurd. Kay asks if Maken thinks those who executed Joan were evil.
Do you think those who executed Joan were evil? No.
Okay, I thought you were asking for my opinion here, but I guess it's all up to you now. Excuse me. We do get a question we can answer after that, though. Kay asks if we have any regrets. Answering yes has Kay saying that even though we have a lot of power, we shouldn't get too confident. After this, I swapped to Blade Master Tyrus and headed back to Amsterdam to track down Devon.
I am Blade Master Devon.
Jeez, don't sound so excited about it.
At one time, Blade Masters maintained world order by utilizing Geist's powers. It sounds impressive to say that we protected the world, but we never ended a war, nor have we brought peace. We've just been killing time.
Man, this guy's energy is really bringing me down. It is interesting to learn that some of the Blade Masters, who are supposed to be these lawful, noble protectors of the world, have doubts and regrets about the paths they've chosen. You know, the story in Maken X isn't bad. It creates a rather layered narrative, especially on multiple playthroughs as you make different choices and see things from other perspectives. But I think there are two things that hold it back. The poor English voice acting, as well as the pacing of some of the cutscenes, especially in the early game when there are a lot of meandering scenes introducing the lab technician characters who, by the way, have hardly any bearing on the story. I feel like they could have easily been cut or just not given such long-winded dialogue. It distracts from the narrative and slows down the pacing. And listen, if you've watched this channel before, you know I love bad voice acting, and I laughed a lot at the performances here. However, I think because there's something of substance to this story, the poor voice acting ends up creating more of a disconnect. Maybe I would have been more invested in Maken Shao, which only uses the original Japanese voice cast. But all I have access to is Maken X, so this is what we're doing. Anyway, I just wanted to take a time out here to analyze all of that, because this scene with Devon in particular caught my attention as I was watching back the footage and writing this script. Again, while I was playing, I was just distracted by his voice actor's performance, which I kind of get what they were going for. Devon's supposed to be a wistful character, tired of the Blade Master's credo, who feels like he's sacrificed so much of himself already. But yeah, the voice actor does not nail this and just sounds bored. Back to the game, Devon orders Maken to defeat Geist's people and protect the world. Saying yes allows us to brainjack Devon, who tells us to confront the leader of the European Union, whom he reveals used to be his lover, so he has access to her home. So we're aiding and abetting a stalker at this point. After leaving Amsterdam, we get another scene with Kay, whose condition continues to deteriorate.
Did you ever wish you were human instead of the machine that you are? Wow.
Kei is surprised by Maken's affirmative response and resolves to cherish the world, because everyone she knows and loves is here. Vienna is the home of Hake Margaret, the leader of the crumbling European Union. So as Devon, we break into Margaret's manor to confront her. This stage is basically a boss arena, but once we enter, we're greeted almost immediately by a large auditorium. And yeah, those banners had a different symbol in the center of them in the original Japanese release of Maken X.
Maken, you must feel pretty darn good about obstructing our plans thus far. Because of you, I am now the last Hake in Europe.
My god, is that Moira Rose?
I've been gutted! John, I've been stripped of every morsel of pleasure I earned in this life!
So first, we gotta bust up Margaret's giant robotic horse that she's piloting around. It can't be hit from the front, so we need to run around these giant seating boxes and hit it from behind. After destroying the horse, we fight Margaret herself, and the fight works basically the same way, because she'll run away when you get too close to her. Defeating her means we can brainjack. Kei's barely hanging on at this point, and says they need to get to Lisbon. So since we found all the Blade Masters and defeated all the Hake in Europe, that's finally our destination. Before that, though, now that I'm finally rank 7, I can head over to Joan of Arc's palace on the map and brainjack Hake Ray. We don't even need to replay the stage to do it, so that's nice. I love the aesthetics of Lisbon, but the stage itself is kind of a pain in the ass. First off, the exploding drones are back on certain streets and never stop coming. Then there's a sequence where sets of enemies keep jumping down from a bridge. Hake Ray makes quick work of them, but it's still a drawn-out sequence. To finish things off, we have to go through these freezers where we wait for openings in the hanging fish that cycle through the room so we can pass through. Then we have to wait for these conveyor belts with boxes on them, hopping on and off at different points to progress through this room. All the while, the annoying Sonic rejects are firing rockets at us. Feels like this stage is just designed around needless impedances that force the player to wait. At the end, we meet up with Blade Master Kitty and Ko. Kitty orders Maken to Saudi Arabia to get info from the oil baron Hake Yusuf about Geist. But Ko protests, telling Kitty that Kei needs to get to Dr. Guinness in Brazil so that her Sai can be extracted from Maken and returned to her body. So we say yes to Ko about going to see Dr. Guinness, which opens up Brazil. But Kei still says she wants to save the world. Kitty assures us we'll have time to meet up with the doctor after we defeat Geist. So then Kitty says to go fight Geist, and we say yes to this as well. This opens up both paths. Kitty offers to show Kei the way to the oil palace, while Ko says he's going off to meet Dr. Guinness. We're briefly back in the research lab where these nerds have just been hanging out the whole time.
Negotiations on energy between the US and China have broken down. The US is expected to take sanctions against China.
Is this really meant to be fiction? Again, there's a bunch of mindless chatter between these two. The power goes out in the lab and apparently all across Japan. Turns out the Japanese government turned off the power grids in anticipation of a war between the US and China. I don't know why they did that, but that's what's happening. And again, it really doesn't have any bearing on the story, so just another pointless detail. Anyway, the path forward is the oil palace in Saudi Arabia. This stage sucks. There's only one enemy type that's extremely easy to cheese, and there's a maze of single entry doorways, which is frustrating to navigate. At the end of it all is Hake Yusuf. At least he's got a cool hangout spot.
Maken, what's wrong with you? Why don't you understand our ideals?
God, what a dopey voice. Yusuf says that Geist has taken control of the US president, and then it's time to fight. I got him stuck in this loop where I could just keep blocking and attacking. Then he did this special attack that just left him open to punishment, so he went down in less than a minute. We can brainjack him, so let's do it. Brazil and Washington open up next, so it's up to us to decide where to go first. Even though I said I'd defeat Geist first, I decide to head to Brazil to meet Dr. Guinness. I like this stage. The rainforest theme is refreshing after all the hallways and cityscapes. At the end, we arrive at Dr. Guinness's lab.
She's getting very weak. That's why I told them to stop the project. But they...
We can talk about it later. Right now, we need to save Kei.
I don't know how to separate a fused Psy back to its own body.
What? You don't?
So we came all the way out here for nothing? I just wanted somebody to keep me company in my jungle lab. So Guinness says he's heard of a reverse brainjack procedure, but he says it's impossible to perform because they need Kei's body. Ko makes the reasonable suggestion of having the lab send it over to them, but Dr. Guinness says all the air routes have been shut down. Bummer. Ko says he has to go ahead and defeat Geist himself, and I don't know what the hell he's talking about, at least not on this playthrough. Anyway, it's off to Washington, where we take an elevator from the Oval Office to an underground base. This stage also sucks. This is the one I was talking about near the beginning of the video, where you need to destroy these robots as they jump onto the lift in the missile silo. It's terrible. At the end, we meet the President of the United States of America, who's also a Hake. Hake Brown.
Salutations, Maken. I am Hake Brown. Our Lord has already gone back to Shikine Castle. But Maken, you don't have a clue. I just cannot comprehend why you only use your precious gift for the Blade Masters, no one else. What is it that you don't like about creating absolute order with a god's power?
Excuse me while I do this JoJo pose. So anyway, the president snaps off his own head and jumps into a giant robot. God, how I wish that would happen in real life. We're also in the middle of this wrestling ring, which is hilarious. This fight is disappointing though, because it plays out exactly the same as the ones against the smaller versions of the robots in this stage. This big boy just has more health. Afterwards though, the ropes become electrified and we end up fighting the slim, all-American version of Hake Brown. He's a bit tougher, but once we learn his patterns, his attacks are easy to dodge. We can also bait him into running into the electrified ropes and stunning himself. This can happen to us too though. If we've maxed out our rank, which I have on this playthrough, we can brainjack Hake Brown to finish out the game. Last, we head to the Forbidden City in China. Don't know how we got there, since Guinness told us all the air routes around the world were shut down, so I guess this trip took about 6 months. The Forbidden City has an interesting design. The first part is just a few arenas where we fight different combinations of enemies, but then you enter Geist's world. Unfortunately, this swirling background combined with the stiff movement actually ended up giving me motion sickness, so I'm not going to show off too much of this stage. There are parts where other sections of the stage fall into place too, and it's disorienting. Passing through a shrine at the end puts us face to face with Geist, who gives us more details about his plans and ideology.
What is the meaning of maintaining a ruined world? Should I just let these silly beings destroy themselves? I don't understand you. And you know what? I don't want to understand you.
So Geist is a moody teenager. The fight is once again simple, and especially with Hake Brown, arguably the most powerful character in the game, he goes down fairly quickly. But this is only his first form. So now we fight this monstrous, true form of Geist. First, we need to knock these projectiles back at the orbs surrounding the arena. Only then will Geist come down to face us. He'll only reveal his weak point at certain moments in the fight. His weak point is this large green orb that looks like he's grasping onto with his little Tyrannosaurus arms. Pretty lame final boss, really. The creature that was Geist shrivels up and crumbles away. So, we've defeated the big bad and answered yes to everyone's questions. So, what ending does that get us? Well, first we have to listen to these boring fucks, but then Kay's father appears and they attempt the reverse brainjacking procedure.
Final separation is complete. Everything looks A-OK.
I've got the focal point of her side.
Kay!
Did your balls just drop, Ko? And he doesn't even get a hug from Kay. She runs straight to Daddy. Ko's simping hard.
Are you going to seal Maken?
Yes.
But shouldn't Maken have the right to live?
Maken, who killed Geist, has now obtained the power to control the entire world of Psy. It's very possible that Maken could become another Geist.
Is this an order from Master Li? You made the right choice.
What a jarring ending track. So that's it. We followed the lawful path, answering yes sir or yes ma'am as we went, and that's our ending. Geist was defeated, the world was saved, Kay and Maken were separated, and Ko got blue-balled. So what happens when we say no to everybody? This playthrough is going to be shorter, because saying no makes it so not all of the stages open up. So whereas my first playthrough took about 7 hours, the second time through only took about 4. The beginning doesn't change. Our first choice comes up when Lee asks us if we're willing to stop Geist.
So, are you willing to pursue them in order to stop this mad conspiracy? So you refuse my request.
But Kay's Sai is inside of Maken's artificial brain. If anything happens to Maken, who knows what'll happen to Kay?
I will go. I want to save my father.
Bullshit. So even if we say no, Kay overrides us. Guess we wouldn't have much of a game if she didn't, but this sets up an interesting conflict here where Kay's Sai overrules Maken's will. Wonder how long she'll be able to keep that up. Things play out the same until we meet Fei Shan Li in Hong Kong. She asks if we'll head to India to defeat Shaja. Saying no gets her pissy, but she doesn't do anything about it, and says she'll just take care of Shaja herself. The hell you will. Kay is not too happy that we killed an innocent person.
Why'd you kill Fei Shan? There was no need to kill her. Was it her attitude?
Yeah, something like that. So because we didn't agree to go to India, that stage doesn't open up for us, and we head straight to Moscow, where we run into Kitty. She mentions something about us killing Fei Shan, too.
I understand you killed our disciple, Fei Shan. That's okay. You must have had your reasons, and I won't hold it against you.
Well, okay then. That's very lenient. So Kitty leads us to Kay's father, and things continue. No new choices to make here. We have to head through London again to move forward, but we won't be saving Sam Smith this time. We ain't in the mood to help nobody. In Amsterdam, we skip meeting up with Devon, and I don't meet up with Tyrus and Leon either. Even though we can't explore the entirety of Joan of Arc's palace, passing through to the stage exit will give us a path to Athens. So we don't need to play Istanbul either. We could skip meeting up with Elise this time around, but I decided to drop in on her. She asks if we're willing to defeat Geist's people.
I know you may not entirely agree with our ideas. However, remember this. If you refuse this request, you are an enemy to the people. So, what do you say, Maken? Do you still refuse to help us?
Uh-oh. She's put us in a quandary now. If I say no, that means I agree with her. Shit. Well, I guess I'm already breaking the rule of this playthrough. But if I didn't, I wouldn't get to fight her. I brainjack Elise for a slightly stronger character. Kay's really pissed this time.
Why'd you kill her? Did you have a problem with what Elise said? Or did you just want to absorb someone else's sigh?
Yeah, I mean pretty much the latter.
Please, you must cooperate with the Blade Masters. You know, if we defeat Geist, we can rescue my father.
Fuck your dad. Yeah, man, that was kind of mean, but yeah, fuck your dad. Lisbon opens up, but we don't have a direct path there yet. All I needed to do was play through Leon again, and I could get there. We meet up with Kitty and Ko at the end of the stage, but this time Kitty is suspicious of Maken's actions. She asks if we're going to side with the Blade Masters or Geist. This isn't a yes or no question, so I don't quite know how this is going to shake out. Kitty's response to our answer seems to imply that we've chosen the Blade Master's side. But she says she doesn't trust us. Ko begs Maken to travel to Dr. Guinness's lab. This is more clear-cut, and our answer turns Ko and Kitty against us. We have to fight both of them. Ko's a pushover, but there is a scenario where we can let him win, and we'll take control of him for the rest of the game. That's another story path, though. I kill him, and he goes down like a bitch. Kitty is a different story. She's pretty tough, but during one attempt, I got her stuck in a corner near the beginning of the fight and just stun-locked her to death with normal attacks. Unfortunately, I've played so few of the stages, I'm not a high enough rank to brainjack Kitty. And I'm sure you've noticed, I've actually gone back to playing as Fei Shan because even though her attacks are weak, she's quicker than the other characters I have access to. So after killing Ko and Kitty, Kay pieces out, completely absorbed by Maken. We still have to go through the Oil Palace to get to Washington, D.C., which is fine, just have to run through the annoying maze again. The The enemies take a bit longer to kill because Fei-Shan is weaker than Hake-Rei, whom I was using in my Yes playthrough, but they're still just as easily stun-locked to death. Again, we're not high enough rank to brainjack Hake Yusuf at the end, and we can't go back and brainjack Blade Master Kitty like we did with Hake-Rei in the first playthrough. So my only option is to stick with Fei-Shan till the end or use Elise. I decided to tough it out with Fei-Shan, which turned out to be pretty difficult. I redid the fight against Hake Brown so many times that I managed to kill him without taking any damage when I finally beat him, which was attempt like 12. I counted while watching the footage. I tanked the damage through the first half of the Forbidden City because there are a generous amount of health pickups. Once we get to Motion Sickness City, I run past a lot of the encounters. Because I didn't go and defeat Shaja in India, and because I killed Fei-Shan when she said she would just go and do it, he shows up here. Luckily, he's the same as if you would have fought him earlier in the game, so it's not too bad. After that, we pass through the shrine to confront Geist. Since we've chosen neither the Blade Masters nor Geist, he has a little speech about how it's foolish to disobey everyone and ridiculous that a man-made device could rule the world. In the end, we take on Geist's true form again, and then we finally get our ending, where we meet up with Mr. Lee.
Ah, you defeated Geist as we requested. I must thank you for that. However, you chose not to obey us when we asked you to save the girl. Why? She was a critical link to a promised future, and so now the world is in utter chaos. Maken, I don't know what it is that you've been searching for in life. The nature of light and darkness, the aspect of order and chaos, they are both the same. To have absolute order, one needs the power of absolute chaos. Now, Maken, you will become the Lord of Chaos and lead this world. I bid you farewell and hope that the eternal light will guide you on the path of order.
Remember, kids, just say no. There's a different story path where you get an extra stage in Kunlun and fight Mr. Lee, but that's for others to find. There are actually 5 more endings, all stemming from making different choices or killing certain characters while leaving others alive. There's a lot of content packed into this little game. Honestly though, I feel like the repetitive gameplay holds Maken X back. It's too easy to exploit the poor AI and cheese most enemies and bosses. There are some interesting aspects of its design, the branching story paths, the large amount of lore and backstory, but it's hidden behind a very mediocre game. I spent about 11 hours playing Maken X over the course of 2 playthroughs, and that was more than enough for me. Hell, getting through the second one felt like a slog, even though it was less than half the playtime compared to my first. I still find Maken X interesting though. It's a valiant attempt by Atlus to shake up the Shin Megami Tensei formula, and I think it's worth checking out for those who are intrigued by it. It's neither good nor bad, the true definition of a 5 out of 10 kind of game. The multiple paths through the story and the choices and options you get to open up ways forward is a really cool design choice for a game that otherwise would have just been hopping from stage to stage around the globe. The first-person combat is novel, but ultimately fails to live up to its potential. The soundtrack is incredible, but the voice acting and audio mixing is strange and distracting. The pacing of the story is also a mess, with thought-provoking story beats couched amidst pointless dialogue between dull characters. Those lab technicians get so much screen time, and all they do the whole game is sit around talking about nothing. So yeah, Maken X is a neat little footnote in the Shin Megami Tensei series, but nothing that's really essential. But you know, I'm never one to tell you whether or not to play a game. I don't think of myself as any sort of video game critic. I just play games, and I have the ability and skill set to make videos about them, so that's what I do. And I choose stuff that I think is interesting to talk about, regardless of whether I think the game is actually good or not. Will it make an entertaining video? That's my only concern. And I feel like Maken X hits that mark. Otherwise, I wouldn't have made this video that you just watched. So there you go. That's Maken X. Thank you very much for watching. If you got any sort of enjoyment out of this video, please like it, leave a comment, share it with a friend. All of those things help me out a lot. If you're not subscribed to the channel yet, go ahead and do that too. If you really like what I do, you can join all of these people scrolling on screen right now and become a dungeon dweller. You can do that by clicking the Patreon link in the video description or hitting the join button on this page to become a YouTube member. Aside from the satisfaction of supporting a creator, dungeon dwellers get some perks as well. They get to watch videos a couple days early, get exclusive updates from me, they get to vote in occasional polls for topics for upcoming videos. This video and my previous video on Grim Fandango were actually voted on by them. And you get access to the Dungeon Dwellers Archive, a playlist of shorter bonus videos that are available only to supporters. There are 2 of them right now. I just released the second one on Mansion of Hidden Souls for Sega CD and The Mansion of Hidden Souls on Saturn last week. Want to know what the differences are between those 2 games, besides just the shoved in the beginning of the title? Become a Dungeon Dweller and find out. If you donate $5 or more each month, you get your name read out loud at the end of videos like these Dungeon Architects: Antichrist Alex, Benefer94, Chaos Arcanum, Dan, Danny Kilpatrick, David Carr, Delatar Tepes, Dirt Possum, El Jaguar, Eugene, Glen Haven, Goats and Goblins, Half HP, High Food Court, Izzy Lexus, J Bud Airline, John B, John Paul Williams, Joshua Ayers, Justin Darnell, Kale, Captain Ketchup, Kevin Hanley, Krizik, Crunk Wizard, Kiowa, Lunarvale, Meownarchy, Micah Powers, Mr. Loser, Mr. Eater, Nick Wolf, Nom de Guerre, Rez, Richard Cutting, Richard Sanchez, Richort12, Rog U, Shannon Gates, Sigma Simp 69, Slowbro 96, The Stoic One, Vinci, and White Like Eyes, as well as these dungeon connoisseurs: Alberto Amatucci, Alexis Barragan, Alfred Correa, Andy Rahman, Andrew Toveniti, Andy Kaiju, Anjan01, Arrested Rabbit, Burger Von Burger, Bewildering Avocado, Big Farty Nuts, Blue Mantis, Bonsai, Bunzo, Captain Swing, Churm Slurm, Chiral Spiral, Claire Myers, Combo Trigger, Concrete Mascara, Crassus Zero, Crippler Jones, Dale Walden, Daniel Talo, Dapney, David West, Dazed Clockwork, Deco, Doroco, Deus Ex Brachina, Devil's Honey, Dr. Jellybean, Drebo Bebop, Dungeon Chili, Fangro, Glitterthroat, Hokon Boyum, Harvey Bodega, Icehammer 82, Indigo Happy, Irregular Rob, It's a Mia, Nekokami, Jack Roberts, James Chambers, James Ray, Jason Cook, Gemma, Jet Daddy, Joan Valise, Joe Gother, Jolly Bean, Joshua Weber, Karen Rosenow, Clin, Lady Nagram, Leica Come Home, Lampshader, Liana, Lux Custodes, Mira, Macrophage, Man with Confetti, Masakishi, Matthew Wall, Matt Norred, McEldritch, Meatman, Michael Oliver, Minced Meat, Mr. Independent, Monkey Kid 61, Naught Poncho Esquire, Nicolas Polstar, Noel the Monkey, Old Dead Lemons, Olaf Albine, Please Keep Making Videos, Prince Goof, Ribbon Black, Roland, Sable, Salty Groove, Sensei Wolfman, Shark King, Sean, Cicerin, Skyclad Weeb, Slycat, Solar, Sorbet, Spencer Newton, T, Talon Edu, TCB, Toops, Tor Dragon, True Axiom, Tuesday Twin, TV's Brent, Violet the Insatiable, Warrior Song, Where Am I? Help, Wolfenheim, and Zach Diedrich. Thank you all for your support, and thank you, once again, for watching. Next time, I'm covering something cruel for Halloween. That's my hint. Until then, Maken X, check it out. Dungeon Chill, out.